There we go.
Good afternoon. This is February the 9th, 2024, and we're in the home of David and Cinda Hortin here in Tallahassee. My name is Lynn McLarty, and I'm a member of Trinity, been a member of Trinity since 1979, and I am the historian of the church, and I have prepared prompts for David and Cinda, and the videographer for today's presentation is Rex Adams, and Rex retired as the Director of Communications at the church at Trinity. What year was that, Rex?
2019.
19, okay, same year I retired from my practice. David was the senior minister at Trinity from June 1988 until his retirement from Trinity and the Florida Conference in June of 1999.
Right.
June of 1999. David and Cinda have continued their involvement with Trinity since his retirement, and today's interview will be an open forum, and it'll allow them to an opportunity to share with us their life together at Trinity Methodist Church. David, will you tell us about your early years, and we'll just get going, and then I know everything will evolve as to what we want to hear from the two of you.
Well, I was born on a hot July day in St. Petersburg. Now, I know that because there are no cold ones in St. Petersburg in July. And a faithful member of my dad's church, Dr. A.J. Wood, came into the waiting room and he said, oh, it's a boy. So that's the way I got off to a start there in St. Petersburg.
And the early years?
In the early years, the things I start to remember well was my dad going in the volunteering to go into service. He had 30 members of his church who were serving in the armed forces in World War II. And he felt like he had 8 of those were Gold Stars. And one of them was at Pearl Harbor. And so he went into service in '43. And I'm always proud to say my dad went to Harvard. He did, yes he did. But it was the military chaplain school, which was held at Harvard. And Mother drove us up there, drove me.
Uh-huh.
And my sister had gone on. And so we went up there, and we went out to the ball game. You know, I am so old that I have seen the Braves play in Boston.
Brave Boston. Before they were the Milwaukee Braves.
That's right.
Or the Atlanta
Or
Braves.
well, yes, I was in Atlanta when they came to Atlanta, and David was there in Boston when they were the Boston Braves.
We went actually because his friend Bill McKechnie was managing, I think Cincinnati was in town, and they were, although he had managed the Braves at one time. And he was a fine Christian man, and in the Hall of Fame. Bill McKechnie gave me baseball, I still have it. And then he had lots of tales he told about the fellow who directed him trying to make military people out of these preachers. He'd say, you're going to be a round peg in a square hole. Things like that. So then they said, well, that he was to report to the headquarters of the 2nd Air Force, which is a training Air Force. And the headquarters was in Colorado Springs. Oh, that sounds nice. And so we drove out there, and we couldn't believe it was going to be a city up against those mountains like that. We couldn't see it yet. And he went in the building and came back out and said, well, Chaplain Merrill, who was head of all the chaplains in the 2nd Air Force, wants me to stay here in Colorado Springs and be the post chaplain. Oh, tough assignment. Well, there was the Battle of Pikes Peak, but we won that, fortunately. And but we really would see, sometimes when we'd be up in the mountains fishing, we would see the 10th Mountain Division preparing to go into northern Italy. And you know, our former man who ran for president was all shot up in northern Italy. There was a 10th
John
Mountain.
McCain?
John,
Or no,
John, from Russell, Kansas.
Bob Dole. Bob Dole.
Bob Dole,
Dole.
yeah. So that was an early experience that I remember. Those going to Boston, going to Colorado Springs.
Did your dad just, was he taken away from the conference and they had somebody come into his church during that time?
Right. He left at conference time in '43, and in the 3 years he was gone, they had 3 preachers. It was a sort of unique place, and also it had been a part of the St. Johns River Conference,
Yes.
the Northern Methodist Conference, and the Northern Methodist Conference operated differently. Their trustees ran the church. It wasn't that way in South, and so these fellows would come in, and they couldn't run that thing like they were used to.
Having the bishop.
And for instance, P.M. Boyd was the last one who was there, and he told them, he announced before the bishop could do anything, that he'd be leaving at conference.
He was ready. David, get us up to your college years, and then I would ask Cinda to please parallel this with your background from where you were born and your early years in your hometown. And then I know we're going to get to your meeting each other and then your work together in Methodism,
Yeah.
and come to Trinity eventually and tell the stories there. But please, David, now get us to your college, or start with college and tell us that, please. I know you played basketball.
Right.
You dressed out.
I came probably to Florida State because I had come to Boys State, was held here. And so I knew about it, and I always liked this part of Florida. And it was the reason that I wanted to come up here. And, you know, I wanted to play basketball here, and they did give me a scholarship, but that didn't mean much in those days because they only had 6 scholarships to run the whole basketball program. So they had to split them all up. So, but I got tuition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that was only $75.
And you were in Tully Gym?
Ultimately. We started, in those days you had to have a freshman team. Freshmen couldn't play in the varsity. And so we practiced at the old Air Force gym out on the campus out there. Now,
At Dale Mabry?
yeah. The home team had a big advantage here because there were places where the floor had rotted out. You dribble there, the ball's not coming back up.
That's not about true.
So we were very excited about Tully Gym, right? We got that.
Was it built then while you were
Yes.
at FSU? So who was the coach at FSU?
Kennedy, not
Not
Pat
Pat,
Kennedy.
not Pat.
Bud Kennedy.
Bud Kennedy.
Bud had come to be the, I think the business manager. But he had a background in all this, and so they made him head basketball coach. The guy that knew all the basketball though was my classmate Hugh Durham.
Hugh Durham.
Right.
Which finally, I mean not finally,
And he
but
became the
ultimately
coach.
became the coach, and they went to the finals.
Came within 6 points of beating UCLA.
UCLA, yes. Dave Cowan's and the guys that.
They
those
were
years.
later.
Yeah,
They were later.
They were later.
Yeah.
So we're now, and you stayed at St. Pete and graduated from high school?
St. Pete, yeah.
Okay, and came here.
Yeah.
Cinda, will you please take the
I made some notes. I'm not quite as good on my feet,
Oh, okay,
or
you-
my mouth isn't as David is. But I grew up in West Virginia. That was my native state, Virginia, West Virginia. And West Virginia became a state during the Civil War. And that's very important to those of us who grew up in West Virginia, because that means we're Yankees. And it's I don't talk about that a lot, but some people just couldn't take it. But at any rate, I did, and as I've known a lot about my family history through the years with a grandmother and great-grandmother who saved things and talked about them and told a lot of stories about them, and my mother too. I've also learned that we have many Methodists in our family, but going back generations, and a lot of Methodist preachers. And in that part of the world, there are a lot of Methodists, so we owe a lot to the Methodist Church.
There's more Methodists per capita in West Virginia than any other state.
Today, or?
Well, that's a few years
It's just-
ago.
that's the-
Yeah,
that's the- that's the-
years
That's
ago.
not my
That's the statistic we
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So as soon as I could, stand up in a little nursery school class, I was in church. And I have a strong memory of Mrs. Reinhardt, who led our little nursery group and did a lot of things in church. Was always in choirs, always in Girl Scout troops that often met at our church and were sponsored by our church. We were a small Spencer, West Virginia county seat town, but we had 2 Methodist churches.
Wow.
And so that was just the way it was.
Yes.
But they didn't make a big thing out of it. I mean, my mother went to the other one because she liked the pastor and the youth group. So,
One of them was Methodist Protestant, right?
yes, that was
One
Methodist
of the 2 churches,
Protestant.
one was MP and the other one was MEC.
Methodist
Yes,
Protestant.
Okay.
ours was
And they
MEC.
they were already
just-
ordaining women.
Really?
Really.
We,
Yay.
we had an MP church in Tallahassee at one time.
Really?
Yes, in the 1830s and 40s.
They were strong in the
And we
Midwest.
found in 45 in our records that some of their ministers came to Trinity, and then they became in the Florida, not the Florida Conference at the time, but they became MEC ministers. And then we have a lot of members saying that they came to Trinity, not Trinity at the time, they came to MEC from the MP church. So, speaking of that, I want to interject that there was an association, even in Tallahassee, between the two Methodist churches. Cindy, please keep going. And
Okay.
We're going to get up to your college and you and David's meeting.
We moved to Florida from West Virginia because we had lived in California after the Second World War, and my parents got very attached to patio living. And after we had moved back to West Virginia to help with family illness situations, but just after my 9th grade year, I always say my family moved me to Florida because I don't think I packed much. All winter I was saying, where is such and such? And mother said, well, I didn't think we'd need it in Florida.
And where did you move to?
We moved to Clearwater,
Clearwater.
Florida. And the last thing I did at the church was they asked me to teach the kindergarten class, and I had about a dozen kindergarten children. I was the only one. I was it. I took them on some field trips that I'm sure there were no, signing away the kids' lives when they went across this road or anything. We did a lot. Anyway, we immediately got visited First Methodist in Clearwater and joined there. Rudolph McKinley, who was a new associate there, said through the years, he said, oh, your family's the first family I took into the church. So we got involved, and they had a very active youth group. And one of the ministers who worked with the youth and really brought that program along was Ray Harrison. And we speak about the Methodist Church as being a connectional church, but it's not just the mission programs we share and donate to as a group of Methodist churches. It's all the connections with people that we have. And Ray was, he brought that group along, And then after I met David, I'm jumping ahead, but I'm just going to
We're
touch
gonna
on
come
it.
back and fill
I'm
in
just going to
that.
touch
Okay,
on this
okay, please do.
because after when David and I got serious about each other, he called Ray to ask him for a reference, which I was pretty outraged about at the time.
But
Well, you wouldn't hire a yard man without a reference.
But are we gonna get
Not
into
that I'm a yard
are we
man,
gonna
that's
get
for sure. I
into
don't-
to your meeting eventually?
Yes,
Okay,
we
okay.
can. We can do it whenever you want.
Well, you're calling it, so get into that and we'll go from there.
Well,
But
it's,
you were in Clearwater and you went
In
through high
Clearwater.
school there?
yes,
Okay.
and I went to junior college, and it was St. Pete Junior
St. Pete
College,
Junior
and then,
College, yeah.
yeah, and I did go to the one in St. Pete. We didn't have the one in Clearwater then. But, and I got a job at, I was secretary to the director of procurement at Honeywell, which was the aerospace division at that time. I loved the job. I loved the man I worked for. He was great, and
Was that in St. Pete?
that was, it was kind of between St. Pete and Clearwater.
Okay.
And so,
You're still in the same area?
still in the same area, and I had a little apartment, what I could afford on my salary, but it was mine. And my mother wasn't breathing down my neck all the
She
time.
wasn't.
But one Saturday morning, I had the most direct answer to prayer that I've almost ever had. I've had a couple others, but this was strong. And about 6 months before that, two women from First Methodist Clearwater, they'd known each other there, but one of them had joined the church that David had founded, St. Paul Methodist, when he got out of seminary, so it was a new church. They tried to fix us up on a date, but I wasn't available, and so that fell to the wayside. When I went into work the next day, my best friend there, I said, well, I almost had a date with a preacher. And she said, oh, who is that? I said, well, his name's David Hortin. Oh, I know David Hortin, she said. So we had a little conversation about that. And that was the end of that. But about 6 months later, I feel very directed to go to St. Paul. And they were meeting in an elementary school at the time. And meet him, see what he was like. I was favorably impressed. So,
From David being David or from the pulpit?
no, I hadn't even heard him preach yet,
Okay.
but
We
that
had-
reinforced it.
Was it Monday? We had our friend Tom Daly and his wife come in. Now, Daly was a
Oh, this week,
high
yes.
school kid, lived next door. And Daly would help get the church. He was sort of my assistant pastor now. He was ultimately with the Secret Service, guarding Agnew, probably a mistake. And he was by to visit us.
This week.
And so he was kind of taking care of things at Betty Lane Elementary. And we had the guests fill out a card, that they had worshiped. Because I got no members. We gotta have some members. Because I got a mortgage, and on the church property. So I said to him, Daly, where's the card on it redhead? He said, oh, Nenny. I said, don't give me that now. You caught that card up. And so I'm telling you, she didn't fill out a card. So you sure? So okay, next Sunday, I'm out in the hallway, and she comes up and I said, you didn't fill out a card last week. She says, well, I didn't have a pen. Oh, I says, well, take mine.
Let me take care of that.
He trusted his cross pen to me.
Oh.
He
So
trusted.
that's the beginning.
So then, for how long was it that you were the minister and you were the working lady at Honeywell? Is
Another,
another.
what, we met in June, I would say it's about June when we met. And June or July, and
July, probably.
yeah.
It was hot.
Oh,
hot.
they're all hot.
No doubt about it.
I was born in August, my mother said they're hot.
It was hot. If you were in St. Pete, it was hot. Okay.
But we were married on December 7th. So, things you wouldn't want your own daughters to do, right?
Can you see why, if you're going to marry somebody after you've only known them 3 months, you better get some references.
3 months. Huh? You're telling, is that what you're saying to
That's
the
about- that's about
congregation?
it. Uh-huh.
3 months, yeah.
And we
Better-
tried
better
to keep
check
that
it.
a secret. You know, on the card, when I did fill the card out, I put, well, I had worked with youth, and so that's what I put down, and
Youth
David
work.
followed right up on
Youth
that.
work. Yeah. So you became Miss Preacher, so to speak.
Oh, no, I was never that.
Never Miss
Never
Preacher.
that,
Never Miss
no.
Preacher.
Neither I nor the internet have contributed to David's sermons.
Okay, well, but both of you now can contribute to the conversation of your time together and your service to different churches through the years. So, will you please? We'll go from there up,
Want me to-
and we're going to get to Trinity.
Start down.
Good, please.
This, the Bishop James Walton Henley sent me to this vacant lot in between Largo and Clearwater. There were no members, there was nothing started, it was just a vacant lot with a mortgage. The one thing you know right off, you don't have to be a seminary graduate to know, you better go get you some members, you gotta pass a plate in front of somebody. So, we were there 9 years, and I took in 1,200 members there. And it ultimately became a 4,000 member church.
David.
The timing is location is very important. Timing is very important in starting a new church.
Had the DS picked out the site for that church?
Yeah,
and
the committee had picked out they had picked out the site and
Your
purchased
dad
it.
picked it out and
No.
approached?
No, it would have been the church extension or whatever
Okay,
they called it
okay.
then.
Yeah.
And so the district took it on themselves for the mortgage on the property.
Right, the conference,
Okay.
yeah, conference,
yeah.
and my salary,
Uh-huh.
you know. So
Minimum salary.
then from
I
there,
would think.
Bishop Henley moved us over to Lakeland, to First Methodist Lakeland. Which was a wonderful church, and we had a grand time there for about 10 years. And then Bishop Hunt came and he moved me to First Orlando. Smaller picture there. And then from there, Bishop Hunt moved me to Christ Church, St. Petersburg, where my dad had been for 41 years, which was irrelevant compared to that I had been there as a junior high. And but they needed somebody that knew him and loved him, and so we were there about 6 years and didn't.
And David's mother was dying from cancer.
My mother
When you
got there.
when you were
We moved there.
when you took that church,
Mm-hmm.
your mother had still was still living there, and then
yes.
but
Yes,
she
his
was-
father had been retired several years,
Yeah.
but they were still living there.
And then here to follow Walter Califf at Trinity. Of course, I knew Trinity somewhat because when I was a student, I came to church here. And Dr.
Okay.
Glenn James was a pastor, and he and my dad. See, he was also St. John's River Conference, and he and my dad were friends and contemporaries. And
So David, this would have been in the 1893 church then, the old church?
oh yes.
Yes, because, okay, yeah, so
And,
you remember that church then from,
But they were shortly after that. They were in getting the plans for a new sanctuary, and the first architect that they got came back with churches that were popular at that particular time. The roof came all the way down almost to the ground. My dad called him St. Rufus, and
St. Rufus.
when he brought that to the committee, well, the committee thought it was inappropriate for downtown Tallahassee for that style of architecture. So I asked the guy, what do we owe you so far? He said, well, $60,000, so they wrote him a check. So we won't need you anymore. Now, I've known church committees all my life, and when you bite a $60,000 bullet and you get nothing for it, you can get some criticism. But they made the good decision, the hard decision, but the good decision. And one of them had been over to Dolphin Way in Mobile. And so that's a fellow we need to get.
Who was the minister at Dolphin?
It was the architect.
No, but didn't you mention, have you mentioned to me who was the,
Bishop McDavid.
McDavid was the
there.
minister there, yeah.
He
Dolphin.
came from there to be our bishop, right?
Uh-huh.
Throw the pillow on the floor.
Okay, yeah.
And Mel Ware, my father always called him Chaplain Ware. He's a military chaplain too. Chaplain Ware. We used to fish with him. Big fella. I think played football in Florida. He came here during the building because when the plans were done on Dr. James' desk, he died, you know, and so Mel Ware is here, and they're having Sunday school here, and they're taking them down to the campus to have church.
Opperman.
Busing.
And it was a pretty stressful time.
To lose the minister and being
Yes, all that.
building and
Another-
having to go elsewhere,
another
keep the
few-
congregation together.
The itinerary season never followed a guy that died.
So your assignment to Trinity was in the spring of 1988,
Right,
and you moved to Tallahassee,
right.
and you followed Walter. And you tell us that the connection you had with Walter from early years.
Walter and I grew up in the same church, Christ Church, St. Petersburg. In the early days, it was called First Avenue Methodist. And Walter and his family, and my mother was a sixth grade Sunday school teacher. And my father used him to conduct the service. He was what we call today a liturgist, although it was a term we Methodists didn't know in those days. And so there's a lot of connections, and Walter had worked hard in refurbishing the buildings and so forth. And you know, when Walter came here, his first year the budget was $200,000. Now today the budget's like $1,200,000, something like that, well, higher than that. So Walter really got things going, and Walter felt like they needed a pastor to take care of the people, and it was what was needed. And so he knew me and knew my record and so forth.
And Walter came after Gene, didn't he? Gene,
Right.
Yeah, after Gene Zimmerman. Yeah, right.
I thanked Jane one year at annual conference. He had done 3 things here that weren't easy, and you got to rank a lot of people, but needed to be done. And if he hadn't have done them, Walter wouldn't have had a good ministry, and then we'd been in bad trouble. So the thing about Trinity, one of the bishops was visiting, and I told him, I said, the thing about Trinity is they know that every preacher is going to be different than the last one, and that's not a problem for them. They said, this guy will do things for us that the last guy didn't do, maybe the next guy didn't do, and that's great.
But it unifies
Yeah.
the group,
Yeah.
different perspectives
Yeah.
of the church, yes. So you came into the church and you knew Tallahassee, you knew the church per se, not that,
Although
not that
Tallahassee was
building,
changing by leaps and bounds.
but not that
over
building, but it was still
Right.
the seat of government, and Methodist was down,
Right.
the church was downtown,
Right.
and you had your own ideas about how to direct the congregation, what your leadership skills were.
Well, we got to stop for a second.
See, you knew the seat of government, you knew the church, even though it was not the church you worshiped in
Right.
when you were at FSU, but you had your ideas, you have your ideas about what direction you want the church to take.
Yeah.
Can you, I mean, I know you remember, but please share with us those ideas that you may have had at the early times, and say, you know, it worked, or I ran up against too many walls to do what I really wanted to do, but please, David.
Well, I followed what I saw my father do. My father was one of the best pastors. I'm using the word pastor carefully. I'm not saying preacher, I'm saying pastor. He was one of the best pastors in the Florida Conference. He had a big congregation, 4,000 people, you know, and older people. He'd have 5-6 funerals a week. He had 5 services on Sunday. But he was a good pastor. He took care of those people. And I figured Walter was in agreement on that. Walter figured that's what he needed me to do. To take care of the people, rally troops, get them in the seats, you know. I mean, a guy that's not there is not gonna do much for you. He might send you a check, but he's not gonna do much. So
To contribute to the
try to
congregation.
rally troops, yeah.
Well, you've got.
And the lay people, that you worked with, that was,
You know, there were really some wonderful lay people. I would like to mention 3 who are going on now. You know, and there's many others that could be mentioned, but Myron Blee, for instance. I knew Myron when I was a student here. He was head usher, and and Mrs. Blee was Dr. James's secretary, and he had a knack. He could keep a committee on the track better than anybody I ever saw, and that's important. Keep a committee going. Secondly, Peggy Hughes, you know, she'd gone to law school,
Yes.
and you couldn't ask for a better lay person than Peggy. And thirdly, Godfrey Smith. Godfrey'd be on a committee, and if Godfrey thought it was a good thing to do, the folks around the table said, if Godfrey thinks so, we think so. He could provide good leadership. So, you know, you got people like that too. Most churches don't have one person like that.
David, Walter had a organist here. His name was Myron Mundy. And his tenure at the organ was he was here when you came to the church.
Right.
Is that correct? So
Right.
tell us your relationship to dear Myron. He was such a dear person to my family and my girls coming up in the preschool.
Right.
And he took time and worked with Mary Blackburn and he was really an individual that I'd like for you to speak about.
Right.
Because I know you.
Well, Myron had been the organist for Daddy King, Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King Sr. in Atlanta. And he had learned how to deal with that. You know, a black Baptist, he's the Pope and he's everything. So, like, Myron played this elaborate prelude. Daddy King says, Marion. You know, he never got his name right. So Marion, he says, don't ever play that again. I mean, right in front of the congregation. Well, you don't mess with Myron. So Myron waited until the Kennedy family was there. Yes, those Kennedys. They were there one Sunday, and he aired it out again. Because he knew that Daddy King wouldn't get after him with the Kennedy
They were
family.
there, yes.
Oh, they said that was the most magnificent thing they had ever. Oh, yes, he says that Marion, he's just marvelous. Marion. So, Marvin. No, I
Myron.
Myron comes down here to get his doctorate, and Walter hires him. You know, Walter didn't mind a little controversy, and so he's there, and I'm getting acquainted with him. And Myron was entertaining whether he was playing the organ or running his mouth.
Well,
Or sashaying.
And so he told me something that had happened to him when he was fairly new here in Walter. When Walter was here, he was a student. He dressed like a student, and he'd come in and practice in the middle of the night in the church. And he had practiced in the middle of the night, and he'd gone out kind of the door between the front of the sanctuary and the front of the chapel. And right there on the curb was a police car parked on Park Avenue. And the cop says, "Hey boy, what are you doing in that big white church?" He said, "I'm the organist and I've been practicing." He said, "Yeah," the cop said, "and I'm the President of the United States." He said, "You're not the President, but I am the organist." So we'll find out about that. So they got Walter Califf on the phone in the middle of the night. Yes, they have a black organist. Yes, his name is Myron Mundy. Yes, it's okay for him to be in there at night. Okay, the cop says, "All right, boy, you're free to go." Well, he says, "Thank you very much, Mr. President."
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So Myron made a wonderful contribution. And Myron, he was very helpful to me in that Myron had access to what we might call the subterranean rumblings of the church. And
The divas in the choir.
he would keep you informed as to what's going on.
What's
out
going
there.
on? Yeah.
But they're not going to tell you. So it was wonderful working with Myron.
When we first moved here, and I was struck with Myron's relationship with the young families here. And I remember the Mott Smiths bringing, Clara was just a baby in arms then, but they would go get her from the choir after church, bring her back in to see Myron, and he her. And your girls, and so many. They just, Marty Hall Chumbler's children, and they just, it was so sweet.
But Mary Blackburn
just-
encouraged
Oh,
her.
Mary,
Oh, yeah.
yes, she was wonderful.
She
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
She sure was.
And Myron would go in, that 5th to 6th grade class has got those three wonderful ladies that were running,
Leslie and
Leslie.
Ann and Edna.
and Edna Bennett. Myron would go in there and sit down at the piano. And those kids would show up and they're just half awake. And he would get them going.
It's Sunday school.
And I said, here's your choir right here. Don't make them come again on Wednesday. Just take this one right
Take
here.
these kids.
Put them in there. Because he'd have them going.
David, what stands out as the high points then of what took place in the church historically during your time there? John remembers the voting and all, and when he was there, John Willis and all, and how he worked through that. But did we have any profound happenings in the social issues, or did we have any profound happenings in Tallahassee that stand out?
There is a story that comes out of Glenn James' ministry that I think is worth telling. Because that was the hard time, the integration. And I won't use their names. I could use their names, but they still got relatives here in town. They both end up looking great, but it's a little bumpy along the way.
And one of them was the one who told you.
Yeah,
This.
one of them told me the story.
The story.
And so black people have come to the door to worship at Trinity.
During the time of Glenn James,
Yeah.
not your time.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Glenn told you this. Telling this.
It was one of the men
Yeah,
who was involved.
obviously. Okay.
Yeah. So the ushers go back, and Dr. James in his study service hadn't started, and he says, "Well, black people are here. Where should we seat them?" Well, he says, So I'm sure everybody would want to see him, so put him down front. So I put him down front. Well, one of the leading members said to his wife, after he saw the black people seated, "Come on, dear, we need to get out of here." And they take off. So the next week, another good member of the church, insurance man. You know, an insurance man don't like to make enemies. It's bad for insurance sales. But he went over to see this man, prominent fellow who'd walked out. And he said, "You know, that's not your church there. And that's not those black people's church. That's God's church. And everybody should be welcome at God's church." And he said, "And you owe the preacher an apology." Wow. And I'm glad to say credit for this man. He went and apologized, and he went back to church.
He apologized to Glenn, to Dr. James. Thank you, David, for remembering that.
Right.
Do you,
Myron became, I mean, he was more than a staff person, you know, that we've always been friends and bonded with the staff. But Myron was, you know, something different to everybody, but he was a friend to everybody. And in his, I guess it would be through maybe a couple of years of his illness before he died. And we got to be better friends, and I went to see him a lot, and he asked me about several things about his illness, but he asked me to be executor of his will.
Oh.
And so,
Cinda.
so Robert McDonald and I did
Work
that
on that.
with, you know, gratis for Robert too.
Did you happen to be at Myron's doctorate performance out at FSU?
Yes.
When they turned the organ around?
Yes.
And he played his last piece and he took his shoes off and he said, "I want people to see my feet doing the pedal work."
Yeah.
So he turned the organ around so people could
Yes.
look underneath his feet and see what. But he said, "Now, my professor's not going to like this, but I'm going to take my shoes off." Well, that's how brazen he is.
Well,
would be
he
sometimes.
was, and he was ahead of his time, because now, I mean, when Victor played at the,
At the
Tabernacle,
yeah.
they had it turned. I mean, the camera was on his footwork as much as it was.
Yeah.
But, and Diane Bish, who's been doing church organ work for almost all the time David's been in the ministry, and Myron, or not Myron, but Victor played one of her pieces the other day and a few weeks ago, and I said she always wore really bright, shiny shoes so that
it could be
and
seen.
at her concerts it was always turned. So
Glisten.
that-
It would glisten. Yeah.
I said, "You need some brighter shoes to wear."
You know, they have questioned Cinda's credentials as a preacher's wife, you know, because she doesn't play the piano. And there are many people out there who assume that's one of the
That's what you
qualifications.
do. Yeah. Do that and visit people. Cinda, were banners already at Trinity when you came? I know you're so involved
I don't think
but
so.
that was not a thing that we were perpetuating to
No.
have a banner for this,
No.
a banner for that.
No.
So
No.
you were
Not at all.
you considered the instigator or the
No,
you-
I don't. No, I don't. I wouldn't say I was the instigator, but I got Linda Mobley when she was
Yes, Linda.
director of Christian education. She
Mhm.
was very active in the conference,
Mhm.
and so she was always getting me to do some big banner for some conference gathering. And that I had done a lot in St. Petersburg,
Mhm.
and I started out by doing it with children's ministry in Lakeland, and not myself. A lot of it was the children learning how, and that's interesting.
You brought
But anyway,
you brought the
it's-
talent with you from another church.
Yeah,
but
I
but
guess,
Trinity
yeah.
did not have a
No.
preset person
No,
or
I
a
don't
reason
know.
to have banners until, well, you probably made them for, like you said, for Linda, but
Yeah.
then our 175th anniversary gave us reason to have a
Yes,
very
and the
demonstrable
district, and so
banner.
I got pulled in,
Uh-huh,
you know.
uh-huh.
to do banners for a lot of groups. The one at conference, the 150th anniversary, was that 150 or 175? The conference.
Well,
What,
the
the
church
one-
was 175 and the conference was 150, right?
Yeah.
150
I think
in,
so.
in 95.
But Nell
From
Nell
45
Thrift.
to 95. Nell, yes.
Oh, yeah,
uh-huh.
and so I did it in the what we used to call the craft room upstairs on the 3rd floor. That was the biggest space I could find, and the space determined the size of the banner. And they sent it down by moving van. But it was a big project, and then I worked in the adjoining room. Paul Martell would come check on
Paul,
me.
yeah.
Yeah.
What, did you have, I say a committee, I use that word loosely, but did you have others that were assisting you?
Normally not.
Normally not.
Normally not.
Okay.
Uh-uh. When we were moving from St. Petersburg, I had 2 banners underway, I think, as you went out the doors, and they were large, and they had a stained glass thing. And so I pulled in about a half a dozen friends who I trusted to do work, and they helped me finish it up because there was a time crunch with our trying to move, but normally not. Yeah.
Did they have, in the time you were making these really important banners for us, the 150th and 175th, did they have the machines then to stamp out those letters, or was this a very
No,
intricate,
everything was sand.
hand done, yeah,
Yes.
cut out?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
I drew it, I did it from start to finish. I would design it. Now on the 150th, that was a set, they had a design. And so it was my job to enlarge that to the size that would be right for this space on the floor. And it sounds primitive now, but I would enlarge it on the copy machine, and I just kept enlarging pieces and then
Put 'em together.
numbering and lettering, and
Uh-huh.
so I could
Wow.
fit it like a big jigsaw puzzle, but then, I'd do it on paper to fabric to
Then
put
you
it on.
pointed out that when I came, Beth Fogelmiller came too. We were both new here. And
That's right.
who are you gonna, well, the answer is Ruby Butterworth.
Was the cohesive force there for that?
Ruby was born and grew up here. She
Mhm.
knew all about the church and all about its people. And she's the one that could help you and keep you out of quicksand.
Yeah, I do miss Ruby now to go to
Yes.
her with questions on Trinity.
Yes.
We had a good interview with Ruby.
Yes.
And I think she was the first one, I think Rex, she was the first one we did, and the continuity from her early life through being in the old parsonage at Trinity and carrying through to what she did.
She was related to most of
She was related to Birds and the Bernards and
Yes.
and the
And
Plymouths.
also, in terms of military-wise and service, Glenn James was in World War I. And he was in communications. And you said, well, was that, well, he had a motorbike. And, you'd ride from headquarters up to the front and back from the front there, and so forth. So he gets hit one day with a shell in the hip. And the medics come by and they look at him and think, guy's not gonna make it. So they're gonna leave him. It's one of those classic stories. His buddy points his gun at the medic and says, you're gonna take him in. So he went in and he was languishing pretty much in the hospital and so forth, so on one of the orderlies took an interest in him and scrubbed that wound of his hip with a brush. That couldn't have felt good. And he ultimately got well, but you notice, I don't know, he always walked with a limp because that was stiff, and he had his shoes, the top part had like boots that had, the little hooks you put the thing around, put the string around, and he had pliers that had a longer handle.
So he had to do that daily
Right.
to put his shoe on.
Right.
Good story, Dave. Good story on the guy that's the chapel's named after. Our Glen
Right.
Chapel.
Right, and also, you know, Dr. Dunkel lived where that chapel was. The last one probably lived in that chapel. That was where the parsonage was. And his daughter, I probably had her funeral. She lived here in town. Dunkel. My father said.
Mid-30s, he was the minister in
Yeah,
at
my
Trinity.
father said, I didn't know Dunkel, but my father said, well, nothing really happened in the conference unless Dr. Dunkel approved of it.
He's buried at Oakland.
Yeah.
He's buried at Oakland. Were there any stories when you were preparing for the big 150th or 175th anniversary in dealing with city officials and the district superintendent or the bishop and getting them here? Was it pretty easy to get them to
Yes.
to be in line for
You
that
know,
day?
in the church anniversary, and I forget which one it was, but you know, the only connection, the only person that had a relative that was a part of that was Lawton Childs. And his grandfather, great-grandfather probably, was a minister in the conference at that time.
When the Florida Conference was formed in '45, Childs' grandfather, so you saying was in the conference at that time? Wow. Of all the people, it would be our governor.
Right.
Yes, yes, yes. Wow. Well, Matthew's planning a big event for September the 29th.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're gonna be there, and it's gonna be an overflowing crowd.
You know, when we talked about it, I thought, geez, I won't live that long to go to that 200th. But I said, if I do, I think one of the McLarty girls would come and pick me up and take me to church.
You would hope someone,
Huh?
what did you say? I'm sorry. You'd hope,
When I thought about it, I
Uh-huh.
thought, you know, be pretty old and probably alone and everything, but maybe one of the McLarty girls would come pick me up
well,
and take me to the event.
I'll have to tell them.
Pushing
baby.
down the aisle.
Yeah, yeah.
In a
You'll have a
wheelchair.
special place. You'll have a special place. I think everybody that's been at Trinity is now, are still members there now. They've retired.
Yes,
And
yes. I'm
Yeah.
the last, I'm the earliest one, I guess.
earliest one now,
'cause-
yeah.
Well, Zimmerman is.
He's at the
I don't-
line.
He's not doing well, but.
No, he's not. He couldn't participate.
And
Uh,
just,
Please, I want it open for you to say anything before we conclude. If you have anything.
Do you
David,
have something
You
more?
were
I have
going
something.
down the board the other day in the narthex, and you were saying,
Wow.
I know this guy, I know this guy, I know this
Okay.
guy.
Right, right.
And I don't know if your stories are appropriate for this conversation, but,
You know, a lot of times you're remembered for stuff that you really wish you weren't.
we should not.
And I don't want to perpetuate that. But I do want you to know, I mean, on the original thing you had about military, and my answer is yes and no. It depends on how much credibility you give to the ROTC program.
You were ROTC.
Because what the students today don't know is that in those days, if it was a land grant college, you had to have ROTC for the freshmen and sophomores. So that put all of us in that.
Uh-huh.
And I had to decide between the Army and
And the Air Force.
Air Force. And I thought, boy, those Army guys are carrying a 9 pound. I didn't know that thing weighs 9 pounds. And they're not going to let you shoot it. So why would you want to carry that thing around? So I went with the Air Force, and then they said you had 5 hours to get 1 hour credit.
5 hours a week of
Yeah.
training or marching or whatever you did.
Class and marching.
Uh-huh.
But they said if you were on a rifle team, you only had to march once a week. So they got to make that rifle team. The most exciting event in the history while I was here was they got all us freshmen and sophomores in uniform over at Campbell Stadium one morning. And a daughter of the Confederacy presented us with a cannonball that they had found in a tree down Natural Bridge.
Oh.
Now, this is not, volleyball size, this is baseball size.
Send it to the ROTC unit at FSU.
Because, the old man like me, and then the boys from the Florida Seminary
Mhm.
had gone down there, Natural Bridge, to stop them from coming across there.
Mhm.
And I think they finally figured, well, Tallahassee really knew we're taken, so let's leave. But we got the cannonball.
You have it. Where is it today? Where is it today?
It's probably in some museum.
It probably is,
Or
yeah,
ROTC
yeah.
building.
Well, thank you for letting us come into your home and you
If you
share.
have time, I have a,
We
you
have
have
time.
time?
We have time.
You do. Let me just stop this and let me.
Cool.
Okay, here
I
we
had him
go.
going the other day at church. I said, David,
Oh, it
wait,
doesn't take much to have him going.
wait for these for Friday.
I gotta practice it.
it took him a while to come back after that, all that anesthetic and stuff that he had, but the stories came back.
Are you,
Loud and
We're all ready to go.
are you ready to go?
And it's going.
Well, oh, it's going. Okay, we'll have to do a lot of meshing with this down here. Please, Cindy, you have some comments.
Well, I think you might not have opportunities, and you might not have other clergy wives who, and it's wives more than husbands. It's a different ball game when the minister's a woman and her husband is the spouse. He's not doing a lot of the things that we did in the past, and it is mostly in the past. But you don't go to school to be a preacher's wife. You don't learn how to do that. They don't have classes. They don't have this. Sometimes it's baptism by fire. And the people go, every church is different, every spouse is different. And yet, many times, the churches want to meld the preacher's wife into what they think that should be. And as David has said to some people who should know better, so you really want a 2 for 1. You want 2 people for this, And so I have tried to be my own person. It took a little while to come around to that. The first church was St. Paul. They had a lot of openings, for things that needed to be done, and I was happily worked in a lot of different areas. I started a children's choir there, and when we moved to Lakeland, of all places, they had no children's choir program, so a friend and I started one until they could get someone and sustain that, with personnel and finances. But if you don't think about how you feel God is calling you, and fulfill that for yourself, your calendar will fill up with other things. There's always somebody calling. You have to learn to say no. And for me, when we've moved to a new church, I try to see what isn't being done that I might be able to help with. And something always opens up, and usually I'm happy with it. And sometimes I get to the point I say, I'm taking a year off. Or
Well, when
something.
you go on these avenues, do you have a following that you try to bring into your fold, or you try to do these with your own?
It would be different things. In Lakeland, I spent a lot of time and years in prayer ministry and pulling in people and we had a lot of different groups and so forth. Now my closest friend there has moved up and is at Tapestry in the memory care there, but so you make friends and
You do what you have to do.
Well,
And you
you-
did what you had to do.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, but I felt led most of the time. I think that when we moved here, Georgiana Wolschlager had the needlepoint project well in hand, but it had kind of stalled. And somebody before in St. Petersburg came up to me and at a convention kind of thing and said, we need some help getting this moving again. And so when we moved here, I approached Georgiana after a while and said if there was anything I could do. And it was kind of an organization thing.
I had done needlepoint and ended up, you know, we got the needlepoint, the people who were actually going to do it, and anyway, and Georgiana and I worked together.
Actually,
very
put her-
fond of
put her
Georgiana.
life in danger doing it.
Yes,
You almost
several
got
times.
stampeded by some
Oh
buffalo.
my gosh, I carried.
So while you were there, we did the kneeling pads were done?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
But those kneeling pads, they were well traveled. I mean, they went to Yellowstone, and David's right. I was on the edge of the needlepointing on the edge of the river. He was fishing, and I hear this noise, and a huge herd of buffalo are coming down the mountain to the water. It was called Buffalo Ford, and called out to David, "Do you think I should jump on that rock out there in the water?" "Yeah, that'd probably be a good idea," he said. So I and the needlepoint went.
So
Various
one of
stuff.
those needlepoint cushions there has
Oh.
that story to go along with it.
Oh, and more. We were on a flight going out of here, and Frank and Karen Schilling's son was on the flight with us. He was across the aisle from me, and so I wished I had asked him if he would like to put a few stitches in. David put some stitches in. We went to North Carolina
About that big.
on vacation. It took him how many innings? You were watching the
Oh, 9
baseball
innings, I
games.
think.
Yeah. But he said, "I want to do some of that," and I wish I'd done that with more people. But
They're beautiful.
that I
Good
sewed
stuff.
myself to my skirt one time, and I thought I was going to be running to catch a plane. Anyway, it was an adventure, but
Right.
but yes, and Peggy was there were a lot of people who helped with that. Yeah.
So when your interest was at St. Paul's, when they asked you to begin the needlepoint, what church?
Here.
Here.
That
And
was here.
then you and Georgiana put yourselves together to
Yes,
lead and
yes.
and delegate, because each one was done by a different individual.
Exactly.
Yes.
And there were some who were new at needlepoint.
Mhm.
And so I would go to their houses, and we would, Eleanor Daniel and various ones. And, but, we got them all done, and they were very eager and willing to learn what they needed to do. So but it was good.
Well,
I was-
Cecile Baker
Yes.
tells me that you were very helpful to her in making some decisions about the banner that we
Well,
just
I wished I
completed,
was not in a
and,
position I could do much
Yeah.
to help, but I had some fabrics.
We-
I've gotten rid of a lot of
well,
my
we
fabrics.
thank you.
That
She and I were
was
working
glad to
together.
do.
on-
But even now, I know that the spouses of ministers, the women, are still pressured in that same way. You would think that enough time had passed that that might not be a problem, but it still is. And I just try to, every time I've said no or said, tried to point out the differences in us, I try to make it easier on another wife.
Have you
Yeah.
interviewed Curry?
I haven't. If there's an interview, then it's in the annals of the church history, but
Linda may have done it, Linda
Yates may have done it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I'm gonna get to, I hope, at least 2 or 3 more, 3 or 4 more.
Because it's been preachers' wives, at first Orlando, they were ugly to her. I can understand
They were
it
ugly
being
to all
ugly
of
to
us,
me,
but-
but ugly to her, that's way beyond,
David, do you have anything that you could see for the church direction? So we've talked about the past and the present at Trinity. Do you have any word to the congregation or to us?
I don't know. I've known a lot of really wonderful retired preachers, and I want to be among them. So I got a job description
For a retired minister?
for me.
Oh, for you?
For me. Says this: if it's something good, encouraging, uplifting, supportive, do it, say it. If it's not, shut up.
Touch it. Don't touch it.
I'm here to encourage because I'm not doing the work anymore, so I'm to encourage the person that is.
I have one other area I'd like to speak to,
Please.
and that is about parsonage living.
It's a good,
And that gets, a lot of it's just swallowed and, but it's, fortunately, we seem to be at a crossroads. We certainly are for Trinity. I don't know how a lot of other churches are, if they've met, It's hard for some churches to financially meet, a housing allowance payment, rather than just let a house kind of
be there.
go
for you.
down and neglect it. But in my experience and my observations from many other experiences, other people's experiences, the parsonage committee people are sometimes just wonderful. They will be so helpful and guide things. Other times they are positions of iron-fisted power that they want to hold on to. And it can be in churches that you just can't believe that it's not just some little backwoods church, it's the tall steeple ones sometimes too. And the ministers' wives groups that used to meet regularly, and in the St. Petersburg area, you always had a car full of people. Well, my goodness, you had war stories from everybody. So the preachers' families were taken advantage of by the parsonage situations. There were churches that had keys and came in at will. I mean, it's unbelievable. And those have gotten buried. I mean, it can be a very good relationship, but it's a lot of stress on a clergy family. Not that the clergy family shouldn't feel a sense of stewardship toward this house that they're living in, but when those who are helpful, Pat McKenzie, I remember one time, she was on the parsonage committee, and we were at the parsonage here on Live Oak Plantation, and there was a lot of wrought iron furniture out on the patio, and she said, well, it's time to paint these. I'm going to send the men over, and they're going to get this, and they'll paint it and bring it back. Sure enough, I mean, so, when people step in and see something that needs to be done and do it, it's very refreshing, and it doesn't always happen.
That the preachers and the churches would be glad to be out of the parsonage business.
Well, we got out in 2004.
Yeah,
Yes.
you are.
In
Yes.
2004, we sold, obviously, Middlebrooks, and then sold the other one
That was such a nice house on such a beautiful street. I kind of hate
We
to
loved
see it go.
I've sodded that on Saturday mornings back when Gene was.
Oh,
was-
yes.
was before he moved in.
Yes.
And he was in that parsonage to begin with down on,
Yes.
On Adams.
Right.
down
Oh,
close to
yes.
the governor's mansion. And
We
then-
were in there when the Fosters lived there. We stayed overnight in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was a cute house.
So we
And
built
Dr. James kept my shotgun there.
He kept it there
Yeah,
when you were in
the
school.
student.
Okay. Well, I thank you again, and I'm pleased, we're open to your comments and adding to this conversation.
Well,
So,
I would
thank
just
you.
say there's such a wide variety of interests and gifts that people can bring to the church, whether they're regular lay people or whether they're married to the appointed pastor.
Mhm.
And of all the things I've done in the church, which have been many and diverse, my favorite is calling on people. I love to call on
Into their
people
home, into their home.
into their homes.
Cinda should have been a pastor.
Well,
A
it's
pastor, like you said, a pastor.
to help people. A lot of times people don't know what interesting stories they have in their lives, and to bring people out and learn about them and get acquainted.
Yep.
I called on an old boy one day in the hospital. He had one of those semi-private gowns the hospital gives you, you know?
Semi-private game.
And he had a big scar here. I knew him really well. I says, oh, big scar. Yeah, he says, German did that. Oh. But I'm still here, he said, so that means he's not.
Ooh.
He said, the Germans were coming around the end of the trench that day, and I killed 19. And he says, I still wake up with nightmares. We're not created to do that stuff.
David.
You can learn so much about life and living by engaging with other people.
The preachers that don't
Just-
get to know their congregations and their people are really losing out. I think we're at a very critical point in the life of the church. We've lost 35%. And I was with Matthew the other day. You know, he's only had 2 weddings since he's been here. I
didn't know
remember a
that.
summer that I had 21 weddings in 12 weeks. They're not going to a church to get married anymore. Destination weddings.
Destination.
Yeah. I think the church, not just our church, I think the church in general is fighting for survival right now.
Matthew's been here a year and a half, or almost 2 years, and he's had 2 weddings.
Yeah.
That is, that's.
It's hard to believe,
It's
isn't it?
hard to believe,
It means
yes.
you're also short of young people.
Come into the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we gotta really, we're doing everything we can to encourage him and help him, and we gotta jump in and help it everywhere.
As sad as we feel about church
Go ahead.
like Killarn, you know, and what happened to them, and the distraught and the heartbreak that they've had. We need them. They need us, we need them. And it's a new day of the church when we need to support each other and reach out in new ways.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you,
For the day. Thank you for the day.
do you want pictures of these churches to tuck into the